Welcome to the Further Light Podcast, presented by Wisconsin Freemasonry, helping you accomplish your Masonic goals through education and more light. And now, I present to you Brother Napoleon Janczak, with special guest, Brother Jim McGuigan. This is Brother Napoleon Janczak, and today we are going to explore travel, but more specifically, why Masons are known as travelers, its importance and significance in a Freemason's journey of self-reflection, personal development, and the road to being a better man. Now, of course, with many things in Masonry, travel starts in the lodge, symbolically, where a Master Mason goes from place to place, station to station, and eventually reaches the East. It's said that a Master Mason is taught to always seek further light. The East is where the sun comes up, so the source of light is obviously in the East, and the reasoning for where the worshipful Master sits. In turn, a Mason is denoted as a traveler while rising from the West and going to the East symbolically while rising up in the degrees. And this is where that important lesson begins, with self-discovery and an understanding of why travel is important in a Freemason's life, particularly when it comes to leadership. Today, the Further Light Podcast, we have a special guest whom I would like to introduce, a well-traveled brother in his own right, and someone who is passionate about our craft and making good men better. But before we get into that interview, I'd like to inform you that this will be a two-part series on traveling as a Mason. So stay tuned for our next podcast as well. I'd like to introduce Brother Jim McGuigan, past master. Greetings, brother.
Greetings. Thanks for having me on.
Well, wonderful. So I know you had some travel in your life, and I'd like to ask you a few questions and, get into it a little bit. We all know the importance of traveling as a Mason in more ways than one. So I'd like to start out with a few questions. Are you up for that?
Let's do it.
All right, wonderful. So we all know as a Master Mason, traveling to different lodges is important. But when do you think travel should begin for a Mason?
Well, I don't think that it's just important, it's critical. And it should start as soon as you have been raised. There shouldn't be any delay. You need to start to get out there and understand what is available in our craft. We talk about ourselves as being traveling men, yet I happen to know several brothers who have never gone to another lodge. And they're even wardens, which is even more scary. So traveling is one of those ways that you can understand what's going on at other lodges. You can understand how things happen in our craft, and you can understand what the opportunities are. So you may be in your own lodge, and things may have been done the same every single way, but until you actually step through somebody else's door, you don't really know what world is opening up. You don't know what the potential is. And if you don't know the potential and that you can do other spectacular things, you're always doomed to a life of mediocrity.
Yeah, understood. I tend to agree with that. So would you say, I noticed you said, raised, particularly a Master Mason. How about like the entered apprentice or possibly a fellow craft? Do you think that there would be an importance in them being able to travel within their degree?
I think it is important. It is if a lodge is motivated and if a lodge has a sense of urgency, then yes, then that person has had an opportunity to work through their degree stuff right away, and they're hungry. If somebody's hungry, you feed them. And there's opportunities to go out, and if there's opportunities to go out and visit other lodges, you got to go. Now, you can't go to everything. Obviously, an entered apprentice can't go into a lodge of fellow crafts or into a lodge of Master Masons. I understand that. But there are certain events, perhaps it's a table lodge at another lodge or even another jurisdiction. You just got to get out there and see what else is available. Otherwise, we're simply a club. We are the largest, most ancient fraternity in the world. You have to understand the spectacular opportunities and the riches that we have available in this craft. And by the way, when we talk about riches, we're talking about the education and knowledge and the ability to spend time with other good brethren.
Oh, I really appreciate that. We say that, Masons are traveling men. And like I said earlier, it's not just the simple matter of, traveling around the lodge and through the chairs, etc. But even though that's a major part of it, but it kind of represents the journey from darkness to what we call Masonic light, gaining more knowledge. So I would ask you then, what should a brother seek to gain from travel?
You need to understand that not everything is going to be the same. You go to your own lodge, and people oftentimes fall into this rut of always doing things the same. But if you are a Master Mason, and you, especially in the senior warden spot, I will say this: a senior warden should 100% be required to do some travel. If you don't do some travel when you're the senior
we'll
warden,
get into that in a little bit, but
Okay.
I see where you're going with that for sure. But so basically, they should gain more light, more knowledge. They should understand more about their positions and their roles as they start to move through. So let me ask you, more personally here, what was one of the first experiences you had traveling? Was it another lodge, possibly another event, or?
Yeah, when I started traveling, it was just going to another lodge with some of the brethren in my lodge. And you get to understand and you get to feel comfortable about how Masons interact together and how welcoming they are. It's enlightening. It's amazing when you can, when you become initiated, if you can go to another lodge where they are doing the same ritual, for instance, the entered apprentice, and see it done, it's a different experience. The brethren might have some different little nuances. The room might be a little bit different. And you have to understand that the beautiful part about our craft is really the diversity. It's the diversity of place, but it's also the diversity of thought. And that's what makes our craft beautiful.
I think so too. I think that discourse is a major thing, especially when it comes to Masonry. And one way of getting, one way of getting that discourse is to meet new brothers from different areas and understanding just how beautiful that diversity is.
And they're welcoming.
Yeah, absolutely.
The beautiful thing is that when you meet another brother and you've never known him before, and all of a sudden you're part of the family. You are, their doors are open. When I went to the lodge in St. Thomas, it's the Harmonic Lodge. My wife and I were on vacation, and we went to St. John, which is a little island in the Caribbean that's just adjacent to St. Thomas. And I took the ferry over, and before the brother who met me, he said, "Hey, so how am I going to know who you are? Because we'd never actually met. We just exchanged some emails." And I said, "I'll be the only one stepping off of the ferry in a boat or in a tux." And it was great because he showed up. He pulled up and he was standing there in his tux on the dock, and I'm in my tux, and he took me there. They opened the door. The brethren were very welcoming. It was ended up being one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had in Freemasonry.
Wonderful. So I noticed you mentioned a tux. Is there a protocol on what to wear when traveling to other lodges, or have you noticed a commonality amongst brothers when going elsewhere?
Yeah, that's a great question. So different jurisdictions have different dress. Traditional Masonic dress is black suit or tux and white shirt, black tie, black socks, black shoes. Think Men in Black. We are the original Men in Black. So But there are different lodges in different jurisdictions that are much more casual. So you're best off if you find out what is the protocol, what do people usually wear in those areas. And you would probably be a little uncomfortable if you went into a lodge with wearing a black suit if everybody was just wearing blue jeans and a plaid shirt. Now there are lodges in rural areas where people have ranches or people have farms, and they come straight from the fields to lodge. In fact, sometimes they won't even start lodge until 8 p.m. just because they're working all day and they want to take advantage of the light because that's what they do in their profession. So you have to understand and appreciate what lodges, what is the culture of a lodge. Now, generally speaking, you can't be overdressed, but you want to not be way overdressed. You can always take off that tie. You can always put the tie in your pocket if you're wearing a black suit, and it's more of a casual lodge.
So I just want to, reiterate too, like how great of a privilege it is, to be a master mason and be able to travel. I think it's one of the greatest things that happens to us when we finally see or reach that point of more light. What I'd like to ask you, in those instances of your travel, what is one major takeaway that you've gotten from it? What did you learn from that, that one St. Thomas travel in particular?
The way that a brother who doesn't know you can shake your hand and embrace you and welcome you and make you feel like you're home is just amazing, and it touches you into your soul. When I went to St. Thomas, the Harmonic Lodge in St. Thomas, they had several toasts after the meeting. They had several toasts, and it was fun. And they did a toast to country, they did a toast to the master, they did a toast to the grandmaster, and they did a toast to visiting brethren. Now, of course, when you do a toast, typically you stand up. And then everybody raises their glass, whether it's spirited or not, and then you tip it up and toast to whoever is being toasted to. When it was kind of strange for me because I'd never been to a table lodge type experience before, and that's exactly what they were having after their meeting. There was, they rang the bell, as is their tradition right before a toast, and all the brethren stand up. The brother who was standing right next to me puts his hand on my shoulder so that I can't stand up. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm not standing up. And then they did a toast to visiting brethren.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And it was fantastic. And then afterwards, then they asked me to say a few words, which, not knowing that you're supposed to do a speech can be pretty scary, especially
Sure.
if you're in a faraway place. But I shared with those brothers that, it was at home, it was very cold. It was like 0 degrees Fahrenheit here in Wisconsin. But the warmth of brotherly love that those brothers, those gentlemen were showing me was very heartwarming.
Well, that's a great story. And that's one of the beauties of Masonic travel, I think, when you can have those experiences and be surprised by something new, and they know it too when you walk in. There's no other feeling like that, and you describing it as the ultimate in brotherly love, it's so true. Typically, as and we'll kind of move on to the area of the lodge and how that starts, that process of journeying through the lodge, and then of course more Masonic travel after that. Typically, as you become an officer in the lodge and learning the various roles, do you see that as being important to use that to your advantage by traveling to other lodges and learning your role or your station at that particular time in your own lodge?
Absolutely. The protocols in your own lodge, but you don't know the protocols in other lodges. And sometimes people get stuck on this idea that everything must be the same. And the joy, the richness of our craft is just enjoying the diversity. There's a diversity of thought. There's diversity in the lodges, and there's diversity in the way that the brethren may react or treat their guests or each other, and the way that they prepare themselves before the meeting or before the event.
Yeah, I agree with that as well.
Interesting thing about what you asked something that was really interesting before, and that was about how does a Mason dress? Well, I can tell you that the reason why in almost all instances when I go out and I travel, I'm wearing the black suit, black tie, black pants, black shoes, white shirt, is because I am preparing myself internally as well as externally. So when people see me, they look at me and they say, okay, here's a guy who took a little bit of time before the meeting. He didn't just step out of his truck and bam, he's there. He didn't just come in dirty. He actually spent, now maybe this time is not a great deal of time. Maybe I've rushed through and I didn't have a lot of time and I spent 5 or 10 minutes getting dressed. But that time, when you're pulling on your ring or tying your tie, that is a time that you need to spend calibrating yourself for what's about to happen. You're about to go out and spend some time with some brethren who all have your best interest at heart, and you need to make sure that you do the same for them.
Absolutely. I'm reminded of, when we become Masons and we learn that, it will be necessary for you to travel. And sometimes we're charged with that. And we often forget, as you mentioned before, you talked about some brothers that you do that may not have ever traveled before and maybe taking on some leadership roles.
And they shouldn't.
Yeah.
And some people may consider that to be a little controversial. It's not controversial. It is basic Masonry. If you don't understand what it is to go to other lodges, how can you lead? If you don't understand how other people can do things and maybe how they do things better, how can you improve yourself?
Correct, which is kind of what I stated at the beginning, and I think that's vital. A part of that self-discovery, and I think most would agree, is actually seeing the differences in what others are doing in that same station. They may have done something or found a better way of doing things or a better way of speaking, things of that nature. Now, I'm going to shift over to your travels again.
Okay.
You're like I said, you're a well-traveled brother, and I really enjoy hearing some of your exploits. But I think it also serves a more important purpose within the craft, and it can and of course within your means. I know not many brothers can travel out of the jurisdictions they're in, but
well, that's true. However, there's some opportunities to do some amazing things that require you to not spend a lot of money. Now, typically now there are lodges, especially in urban areas. There may be a lodge building that houses multiple lodges. So when you travel, you're going to the same building, the same lodge room, in fact, that your lodge may meet in. You can also go, since the pandemic, we have Zoom. There are many different places throughout the world now that meet and get together for a 9 o'clock toast. And I sponsor the 9 o'clock toast in Wisconsin. So this is an opportunity from the comfort of your own home to get together with brethren. And it's not a tile lodge meeting, but this is an opportunity to learn so much without even leaving your couch or your desk. And I talked with one brother who is actually he's a regular on the 9 o'clock toast, and he was a district deputy grandmaster. And he said he learned more in 1 year on the 9 o'clock toast than he learned in 14 years of being a Mason. And that includes the time he was a district deputy grandmaster.
And that's amazing. I mean, and that literally is traveling in today's age without having to leave your home. I think that's a beautiful thing. So,
and it takes away the excuses too.
Correct.
The interesting thing is, one of the things that that needs to happen is people need to stop making excuses. I am one of those guys that hold people accountable. If you say that, oh, I can't make it, I don't have the time, I don't have the resources, okay, you know what you can do? You can go on your phone, you can go on your iPad, you can go on your computer, and just open up a Zoom session at 2 minutes to 9 o'clock, and then you can go in and find a 9 o'clock toast. Now, these are all over, and there are several Facebook groups where if you make the right inquiries, you can get a link to a Zoom meeting, and they could be wherever. I mean, I met brethren from Scotland. I went on their 9 o'clock toast that was at 3 o'clock in the afternoon here. I happened to have some time at 3 o'clock in the afternoon one day. I popped on, and all of a sudden I got to know those guys.
Absolutely. And that leads into what we're going to talk about next. Having that privilege to travel. Now, I know you've traveled to Scotland a couple of times. How did that come about?
That was actually the 9 o'clock toast that was coming out. Man, what a wonderful, enriching opportunity that was. And I'm talking about spiritually and just soul-filling opportunity. I was in the year that the 9 o'clock toast happened. At the beginning of the year, I was the master of my lodge, and then came the pandemic, and many things shut down for 5 or 6 months. There was kind of nothing going on, but just in that time period, I had an opportunity to start to go out and look for the night, look at different opportunities and things that I could do, instead of just giving up and saying, oh no, this is a wasted year. I'm going to make an excuse and say, oh, let's not do anything. No, not a chance was that going to happen with me. I am not a person who gives up. And just because I was the master and I got dealt a lousy hand in my year didn't mean I was going to let that get to me. So I went out there on Facebook. I found a Facebook group for Masons, and I saw that there was a Mason over in Scotland who had started the 9 o'clock toast. And I thought, okay, let's check this out. This could be pretty cool. So I went on there. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and they were just shooting the breeze and having a good time. They have a very quite the banter over in Scotland. You have to have a bit of a thick skin, and I could tell that right off the bat. And when I walked into the room, when I virtually walked into the room, they saw my name. It popped up, and okay, here's some Irish guy. And then I opened my mouth, and it was apparently evident right away that I'm a Yank. So, but the conversation moved over to rugby or football, and one of them said, "Mr. McGuigan, do you play football?" Or I said, "Well, here we've got American football." And they said, yes, the main sports that we play over here are, we play a lot of rugby here. I said, oh, okay. I play hurling, which is an Irish sport, or I used to play hurling. And they're like, hurling. Some of them hadn't heard of it, which is, by the way, very similar to shinty for the Scots. But they said, well, what is this? What's this hurling? And knowing that they loved rugby, I said, well, it's kind of like rugby, but for men. And then there was a lot of ohs and ahs, and they were like, okay. And at that moment, their whole opinion of me changed, and it became like, oh, okay, this is not just a guy who's going to be boring. This is a guy, he can run with us. He can run with the pack. So I just built up a great friendship with them. But shortly after I did that, I thought, this is something we need to bring to Wisconsin, and we need to pull people together. I don't want to see people feeling isolated. I don't want to feel isolated. I don't want to give up and say that my year is going to be wasted. Let's do something. Let's make something happen. And that's what we did. We started the 9 o'clock toast here, and it was wildly popular. And it's still going on 3 years later.
3 years later. Yeah, absolutely. Just had March 27th, I believe, was the 3-year mark on that.
3-year anniversary.
Every single day.
Yeah.
So here's a question I have. Like I said, I've known, it started with meeting the brothers on the 9 o'clock toast, and your travels led you to Scotland. It's said that the passport to English Masonry comes at the degree of Mark Master.
Well, I did travel to the Grand Lodge of England, interestingly enough, but I didn't. Okay, so I'm going to explain that. The Harmonic Lodge in St. Thomas is actually the only lodge that is the Grand Lodge that is overseen by the Grand Lodge of England, but it's on American soil, because St. Thomas is in the U.S. Virgin Islands. But as far as Scottish Freemasonry, they do have the 4 degrees. They've got the Entered Apprentice, the Velocraft, and the Master Mason, just like we have, but they also have the mark. Now, there's no such thing in Masonry as having as being higher than the 3rd degree. However, the mark is something that we here in the United States offer as part of chapter, which is the 4th degree.
And you're speaking about York Rite.
Speaking of York Rite specifically, correct. Exactly. So the interesting thing about that is that the mark is done after a person over there receives their Master Mason degree, but it's considered part of the Fellowcraft. Yeah, I know, it's a little convoluted. How do you get your 4th degree as part of the 2nd degree, but you've got the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd degree going one right after another. So, would you be turned away? No, you wouldn't be turned away, and in most instances, they would probably ask. And there are certain instances where they may ask you to step out of the room for a short period of time if they're going to talk about the mark. But really, there's no real opportunity or no real need for the most part for them to talk about the Mark Master degree.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about brotherhood when it comes to traveling, and let's say internationally, such as yourself. Do you see a lot of similarities there as you would here, or is it vastly different? I mean, generally speaking, Masonry has its certain opening and closing, etc. For stated communications. However, what were some of the most distinct differences that you've seen traveling internationally?
Well, we have our openings, we have our closings. In Scotland, they can have an opening that is about 1 to 2 minutes. Here we've got if you do a quick opening, it's usually about 7 to 10 minutes here at least in Wisconsin. Their degrees are different. We have, without going into too many details, I'm a big fan of our degrees here, especially our 3rd degree. They have some, I would say that in certain ways they're more tame. However, in other parts, it's the opposite. So they can be very gregarious, and the part, one of the parts that I loved about Scotland was that after the meetings, everybody would get together. They would get together for tea, sandwiches, but more than likely a spirited beverage. And they would, whether it was in the same room or whether it was in adjoining room, they would have their little club or pub that you could get a tap beer, or if they didn't have tappers, they could open a bottle for you, or you could have a whiskey. Typically, you're paying for it, so it's not like it's free, and nobody goes overboard. Now, installations, those are raucous. Get a hotel because it is going to be in many of the installations there, it was just a party. We went there. We went after lodge and after the installation. We went downstairs, which is where they have their pub, for instance, in Lodge Fortrose, and they have a full stock bar, and we sat around until the wee hours of the morning, just having they'll just call it a malt, which is a single malt whiskey or beer, and some people just had water. It just depends on what you want to do. But the thing about that is that afterwards you would get together and you'd have a great time with those brethren, and oftentimes they break out into song, because there must be 100 or hundreds of Scottish drinking songs, and people would just belt it out. And it just so happened in the second time I went to Scotland that the Grand Master Mason was there, Ramsay McGee. Ramsay's a great guy, but who would think that I'd be sitting in the basement or in the pub of or in the club of Lodge Stornoway, having a lodge in Stornoway at Lodge Fortrose, having a malt with the Grand Master Mason in Scotland. It was crazy, and I didn't know that he was coming.
Yeah.
By the way, that was a surprise that some of the Scottish boys on the Scottish Fife Zoom, they didn't really tell me about that.
Yeah,
but they love their surprises.
Definitely a great experience. Well, before we close, what are some of the ways online that you can get into some more light in masonry? Be it like the TikToks or the YouTube, or what is something that's happening out there that you are very familiar with?
Well, social media is one of those things that is very important to jump into if you don't have an opportunity to do physical travel, especially. And even if you do have an opportunity to do physical travel, go on social media and check out what other Masons are doing, what they're saying. Now, there are different channels that are going to give you some really great information, and you just have to find out where that is. So, for instance, I happen to have started a TikTok a couple months ago. So if you went to TikTok and you went to My Freemason, you would find some good information. And I have some fun with it as well. But you can also go to Facebook, and on Facebook there are several different groups that you can ask questions in. You can read some of the different Masonic papers and really delve into the Masonic education portion of it.
Well, Brother Jim, I really appreciate you taking the time today to come hang out with us here at the Further Light Podcast.
Absolutely, and thanks for the invite. I've enjoyed coming on. So, travel light, brother.
Once again, check out part 2 coming up next week. On behalf of the Further Light Podcast team, this is Napoleon Janczak, and once again, we thank you for listening. Are you interested in learning more about Freemasonry in Wisconsin? Visit wisconsinmasons.org to learn more about Masonry and access further educational content and more light. Once again, that address is wimasons.org. Any questions, comments, or suggestions, please email us at education@wisconsinmasons.org. And thank you for listening.